Welcome, 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 and good Friday to you all. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program, which is in the slot of Cultivated Live, but we call it Reporter's Notebook. This is something we launched a few weeks ago with our friends and partners in this endeavor at MJBiz. We like to do it because we get to bring on the best in the business who are reporters, follow the industry closely or closest. Today, my guest is Chris Casacchia from MJBizDaily. Chris, thanks for making time.
Thanks for having me, Jay. Looking forward to this.
I'm looking forward to this too, and not only because you have fish, posters behind you, which is a man after my own heart. Before we get into it, did you see Bruce Springsteen and Trey were on stage together in New Jersey?
Albany Park, baby, the beach. I mean, come on. And Trey had some, Bruce was Trey's hero. So there's some really awesome Instagram posts just talking about seeing his first show ever in his life was a Bruce show. And then to be reunited, man, I mean, worlds colliding. How can you not love that?
He said the same thing. I think it's on Mark Maron. He had a podcast
at
the beginning of summer tour. And now everybody's bored. But one more thing. Trey said that he felt so bad once because he was on stage somewhere and Bruce happened to be in town. And Trey thought it would be funny to say what I believe to be the most talented songwriter in the state of New Jersey history. And then he brought on Tom Marshall, his Fish's lyricist and Trey's friend from middle school. And he says he's felt bad about that for some time, which I think is hysterical because clearly they were expecting Bruce, but Tom came on, but at least they've been on stage together. And
that's a vintage Trey tease right there.
I know, it's great. And the funny thing is, this is now really deep. Long ago, Tom Marshall, Fish's lyricist and friend of Trey for a long time, was doing a podcast for the New Jersey Cannabis Industry Association. And I was on the podcast. And so I actually got to sit down with Tom, which is like super Fish adjacent. And so
yes. We're bringing this full circle, baby.
We're bringing it full circle because now I have you on, which is great. And we're not even going to talk about New Jersey, although I guess we could. We are going to talk about, I want to talk about something you've written and certainly have been following, and that is what is happening in Missouri. And Missouri, I think, is a market people love because it opened up and it was like gangbusters from the day one. I think they passed an initiative in like November. They were open in February. All the medical operators. This is last year, 2 years ago. And it just started. It was almost from day one like $1 billion market.
Yep.
Now, and you're going to tell me where I've got this correct or wrong. Now there's like not tightening of the market, but like we have new hemp regulations in Missouri. We have now I'm going to call them recalls, but also new packaging. Tell us sort of your take of what's happening in Missouri right now.
Well, I think, like a lot of states, especially Missouri was referendum driven. So you basically have this law that voters vote on. There is an insane amount of language within these bills. So a lot of times, when these laws are passed, either through the legislature or through voters, you have a lot of language that kind of dictates the path of what regulation is going to look like. This plain packaging has kind of been in the works now for more than a year now. So operators and brands have had a lot of time to adjust to this period. But of course, when you're dealing with, thousands upon thousands of products, getting them approved. I mean, the regulators in Missouri have to approve every single package. There is a much better template now, but this type of approval has led to inventory issues in the Missouri market last year. And now what we're seeing is, this plain packaging rule, which was first kind of announced over a year ago, was the deadline day was September 1. So now all packaging has to go by this new kind of rules, which is very vanilla, one primary color type of thing, up to 2 logos. So, there's going to be certainly some product differentiation issues that brands are going to have to deal with. I think retailers are going to have to deal with. And on top of what, this kind of stalls that are happening, you have, another massive product recall in the Missouri market. Basically, it's second in the last year or so.
So there's nothing going on in Missouri. And I come from a market, I live in Toronto. We have pretty plain packaging, certainly is even more plain when our industry kicked off in 2018. And there's actually been some, I would say, loosening of those regulations around packaging. It's interesting to see almost the other approach, which is like, it's not going to be plain packaging. And then it is. The way Missouri's done it, at least there may have been some brand differentiation before, which may carry over to plain packaging, but it is a real challenge for the industry, I think, in plain packaging. And this is where it's come up in Canada. I want to get your take on this. It also, the industry would say, I believe, that of course we want packaging to be child resistant and safe and all that, but it becomes very challenging to differentiate the legal product, because the packaging on the illicit market or the legacy market, it looks like Skittles or is called Skittles, right? Like it becomes very difficult for the legal market to compete with the packaging on the legacy market, which becomes really a challenge for the industry. Sometimes, are people in Missouri nervous about that?
I think there's some underlying concerns, but if you look at Missouri's unlicensed market, it does not compare anything to where I'm in Southern California here in LA. It's nothing like California. It's nothing like, New York, in some of these big city markets where, obviously unregulated, unlicensed cannabis has been going on for decades and decades and decades. But just some of these markets just do not have, the bandwidth, the inventory, the supply chains as certain other unlicensed markets. And Missouri, because of where it's at, just located on the U.S. map, there's a lot of inherent benefits of the regulated market in drawing in customers from various states, especially some of these states that do not have adult rec.
Yeah. The irony is that one of the key brands in Missouri is actually called one of the legal brands is actually called illicit. And so I just love, I actually hadn't thought of that till this very second when I was thinking about my interest and insight into what's happening in Missouri. But it does seem to be, and we were talking a little bit before we came on live, every market is an island, right? Yeah. We sort of see that. And then we seem to see things that are similar, or maybe we think they're the same, happening in other markets, like in this case, like California, where there's been some recalls. There's actually some crackdown on hemp products as well. But I wonder, is it your sense, it's not the same challenges that Missouri is facing? It's almost like they are just on parallel tracks, and it may seem the same to someone who's not paying close enough attention, but because they are islands, they are different. What's going on in your neck of the woods in California?
So, obviously we are kind of engulfed in this emerging pesticide scandal where, we've seen now where hundreds of potential products, have banned pesticides in them. They have somehow gotten through the track and trace system in California. There's a lot of reasons potentially why that is. I know a lot of brands and retailers have been calling out cultivators for using these banned pesticides in their cultivation operations. But there's also, kind of this murky world of THC distillate. And, a lot of suppliers that put this distillate into products, they are sourcing them from numerous parties here. And there really is kind of little regulation in the brokerage system in California, and probably for most states, because you're actually dealing with a lot of third-party brokers like you would in other industries. So you're getting kind of this, Frankenstein mix of THC distillate. And when you test this distillate, you're not testing the entire batch. You're essentially testing portions of a batch. And this is, what some operators and lab testers have kind of been angry about is, because they say, well, what we tested has test clean. But of course, you're only testing, a fraction of the overall, raw product that eventually ends up in edibles and vape cartridges and this type of thing. So, really kind of what's happening here is we're seeing a lot of banned pesticides. We're seeing DCC ramp up testing. We've been on this story for quite some time. We did a story a couple of months ago, basically talking about how brands and retailers can expect to see far more product recalls in the California market, because I think they're being a little bit more transparent, DCC. And obviously, this investigation by LA Times earlier a couple of months ago certainly opened the floodgates onto, the potential problems in the California market. One of the major issues here is, though, of course, the DCC, the California regulators, have been just so slow to recall products that by the time the recalls hit hit the market, the products have been long gone. They've been consumed months and months and months before. And it seems like some other regulators like Missouri, contrasting, it seems like their recalls have been far more timely, let's just say.
Yeah, and this goes to probably bigger issues in California, that the state is so big, the industry is so big, that it's tough to govern. It's tough to govern anything, right? Tough to
Yes.
govern education, tough to govern healthcare. Like California is a tough nut to crack from any perspective. Never mind a relatively new market that is like huge with challenging regulations and lots of different players in their infancy. I would think that is a challenge not only for everywhere, but certainly California, which is, I guess, the world's biggest market, certainly in one state. Although Michigan appears to be catching up.
Michigan's been doing, in a lot of ways. I mean, this is the thing, so when we talk about these different markets, now we talk about Michigan, we say, wow, Michigan sales are, going through the roof. They just came off a record month right now. They're on pace to hit 3.3 billion this year, which is basically, a nice little increase from 3 billion last year. So you say, wow, Michigan's a healthy market. But then, let's take a look at that onion. You start, taking off the layers. The price of cannabis is the lowest it's ever been in the Michigan market. At some point, you're going to have this rectification. When it comes to cultivators, there's just no way that a market can support this many producers of weed, because the market is somewhat finite. And of course, again, Michigan has a lot of benefits like Missouri. There are certain places that you can, especially Wisconsin, Indiana, you have states that have no programs whatsoever. And of course, next to Illinois, I'm from Chicago, so I go there pretty often. One of the highest tax rates in the country. We talk about buying weed, you're talking about 40% tax on cannabis in Chicago, when Michigan, is like an hour and a half, and maybe not even to the border from downtown Chicago. So, it's drawing a lot of consumers from a lot of different places. And that's, one of these kind of just quirky things about retail sales in the cannabis industry. When you're along borders, there's a lot of just interesting dynamics that happen.
Yeah, and Missouri is probably one of the biggest beneficiaries, that they're surrounded, I think, except for Illinois, by states that are not legal. And then you have I would say the retraction challenge, where like a Michigan, where Ohio on the border goes legal, and some of the border dispensaries in Michigan are some of probably the highest performing, maybe in the country.
And if you look, we've done these type of stories. I did a border retail story, months ago. And if you look at even what's really interesting, like New Mexico, for instance, if you look at the successful retailers in New Mexico, they are basically along the Mexico border up through Texas, So, I mean, there is a, there's a strategy here of where you put retail, why and when.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about, and you need to be nimble. I mean, I'm not sure Texas is a real threat to go legal anytime soon, but certainly the Michigan border with Ohio, those stores are going to have to right size, I would guess. And as Ohio comes online, and this factors into other markets too, like thinking about the Northeast, right? Where you need to really think about the taxation, the number of cultivators, because you can't have super cheap cannabis in Vermont, if it's going to be, much more expensive in New York. Like New York needs to think about that, because people will cross borders. Massachusetts needs to think about like all these things. It's like 3-dimensional chess for a regulator to like build an industry in their own island, but their island, unlike California, their island is next to a lot of other islands that it's easy to get to, right? Like,
and of course, like a lot of these times when a state goes rec, the laws have already been written, like that, so like in Missouri, 6% tax was part of the voter referendum. That was part of the language in that bill. So when Missouri went live, they started out with a low tax rate. I mean, under 10%. If you compare that to Illinois, which obviously St. Louis, borders Illinois along the Mississippi River. I mean, you're talking about a huge influx of Illinois shoppers that, of course, are going to go to Missouri. Of course, they're going to go to St. Louis. Why would they stay, in their home state when they can just drive, 10, 15 minutes in some cases to go get much more cheaper product?
Right. And even different product too, right? It's part of it is about price, part of it is about quantity, part of it is about quality, like all those things factor into all of these things, which is why it's challenging for regulators, which is why it's challenging for Missouri, as we talked about, challenging for California. The challenges may be Similar, but again, as we talked about, like they're in islands, so they're parallel, and how you actually address them as a market is interesting. Anything else sort of catching your eye this week on the
Well, I
cannabis
think we
side?
have to watch. Obviously, I'm in California, so it's the end of the legislative session. We basically have it's the 18th. We have 12 more days for Newsom to sign. He's got two bills in front of him. One is a cultivation allowance, would essentially allow growers to sell directly to consumers, but it would have to be through an approved municipality or an event, kind of like what we saw in this historic development with the California State Fair. For the first time, consumers were able to buy marijuana at the State Fair in Sacramento. That is something that we should all celebrate. Anytime access is improving is important. So that's an important one to watch. And then a cannabis cafe bill, which introduced by Matt Haney of San Francisco. He introduced a similar bill last year. Essentially, it would allow consumption lounges to open up alternative revenue streams, which they sorely need, because if you've gone to a consumption lounge in California, you realize really quickly that you're only limited to a certain amount of activities that you can do, and as a retailer, you're really limited on essentially selling flower and providing a space to consume, but you cannot buy regular beverages. And we're talking about non-alc, of course, alcohol and cannabis, federal law. The two cannot be combined. But, even candy, coffee, scones, this Amsterdam type of cannabis feel. Newsom rejected that bill last year. There is a lot more hope and expectations that won't happen this year. So those are two, key things that we're looking at here in California.
Yeah.
Of course, on top of this whole pesticide testing recall issue.
It's not nothing. And thinking about sort of the hospitality component of this, that would be great for Cal. I think there's some lounges now in Nevada too. Well, we'll see at MJBiz.
Yeah.
Not to put a plug in for MJBizCon, but we'll see. I know that Planet 13 has one and some others too. But it is interesting to see, often the rest of the states, the rest of the jurisdictions follow what California's done and see. I think the idea of a consumption lounge is super interesting, and sort of the cafe version. And maybe it is like some number of years after legalization, like consumption lounges become a part of the talking points or become part of the vernacular, just because normalization has happened and it's been years. And I think that is a good model to follow. I know New York, it hasn't happened, but I think there's some consideration for it. Similarly, in jurisdictions here in Canada too, it hasn't really happened yet, but I think Edmonton and certainly Alberta, with a more libertarian approach to cannabis, maybe there too. But it'll be interesting to watch it. Chris, maybe we'll have to go check out some of the first ones that'll be in LA.
Absolutely. Let's definitely do that. I know that when BizCon's going to roll around, there's going to be a lot more consumption lounges opened in Vegas. And now we're seeing other states. Illinois right now is working on their regulations to set up a statewide consumption system. I really feel like this is one of the next iterations, certainly of retail, but cannabis hospitality. We've been talking about this for years and years and years, but for a lot of reasons, regulations more so than anything else, and really lack of alternative revenue streams has kind of halted progress in the consumption space. But I feel like this is certainly an area that is going to be primed for growth and expansion, especially as changing consumer habits are changing massively here and across the world. I mean, younger folks are not drinking alcohol like they used to. There's this thought process that a bar and weed would have to be, that would be the way that a consumption lounge is working. That those ideas have quickly changed in such a short amount of time, because what we're seeing out of Gen Z and millennials just really kind of eschew alcohol and just going for straight cannabis. And a lot of them now are not even smoking like we traditionally have always done too. I mean, so you got to bake into all these different kind of changes going on, and retailers are going to have to meet that demand and meet the consumer where they're at. So it's going to be really kind of interesting to see this kind of play out, certainly over the next couple of years in the consumption side.
I see a real field trip in our future, Chris, you and I on the road.
Absolutely.
I like it a lot. Chris, thanks for making time today on Reporter's Notebook. We love this because it allows us to talk shop with some of the best in the business. We do it every Friday with reporters and editors from MJ MJBizDaily, MJBizDaily Magazine, the whole run of show. Chris, thanks so much for your time. We'll connect with you hopefully soon, and definitely in December when we descend on Las Vegas for your show. And everybody that's watching Cultivated, we'll be back Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific for Cultivated Live on Monday. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jay, for having me. Had a great time.